Good morning. This is Pastor Ernie Lewis of the Blue Point Church in Sisney, Illinois, with your thoughts for Tuesday. In 1 Thessalonians, Paul was reminding the church what they went through in order to bring the gospel to them. Not only in Thessalonica, but throughout Macedonia, they were abused. He says in verse 2, "For you yourselves know, brethren, that our coming to you was not in vain. For even after we had suffered before and were spitefully treated at Philippi, as you know, we were bold in our God to speak to you the gospel of God in much conflict." It is exciting to think that their coming to Thessalonica was not in vain. I know there were cities where Jesus tried to minister in the New Testament and very little was done, he said, because of their lack of faith. And this was even after, he says, we had suffered before. The story is told in Acts chapter 16, where Lydia and her household are saved, and Paul and Silas are excited about it, but then a mob rises up and drags them off to prison. They're put in the inner stocks at midnight. And where do we find? We find them singing God's praises at midnight. The earthquake comes, opens all the doors, and looses the prisoners. The jailer runs in, and his first question is everybody here? His second question is, what must I do to be saved? God was working gloriously in his life, even while Paul and Silas were in prison. So Paul says, we not only suffered, but we were treated spitefully at Philippi. Paul reminded that group, that crowd that came and arrested him and threw him in prison, he was never given a trial. And after all, Paul was a Roman citizen, so it did cause a stir in that city. This may be the coming plight of the church, by the way, persecuted for our faith. But at least Paul was proclaiming the gospel despite this mistreatment. And he described their preaching as bold in our God when we speak. I hope and pray that persecution by our godless society around us doesn't quieten us. I hope it makes us even bolder. It will give us an even greater boldness to preach the gospel, knowing that this world so desperately needs it. After all, he calls this the gospel of God. We aren't sharing our opinion. We're not just trying to convince people of our doctrine. This is the doctrine, the good news, the gospel, that Jesus Christ came to save all sinners. And when you come to sincerely believe this gospel as the redemption for all, then you do preach more boldly. You proclaim it boldly because you know a lost world out there is hidden in the darkness. And Paul said, we preach the gospel with much conflict or contention. We haven't really experienced that kind of persecution, I don't think, or that kind of conflict. I do believe it's coming. Please mark my words. The days will come when the church will be persecuted strongly. I think this new administration already has said, we want the schools to teach that gender identity is fluid. You can be anything you want to be, even though God says I made them male and female. Our schools are also going to teach this reproductive health care, which is a nice word for abortion. We're going to allow people to kill babies in other countries, and we're going to pay for it. We need to step up. We need to stand boldly and proclaim the gospel of God so that lives are still changed today.